You light a cigarette at a party because your hands don't know what else to do. You take a drag when the stress finally breaks through. You reach for it without thinking. But the real answer to why you do this is far stranger than habit, and it starts thousands of years before anyone ever sold a pack. Your ancestors didn't smoke to relax. They smoked to talk to gods. Think about that for a second. The thing sitting in your pocket right now began its life as a ritual technology, not a vice. Somewhere in the Americas, over 2,000 years ago, someone rolled dried tobacco leaves into a bundle, set them on fire, and inhaled the smoke on purpose. Why would anyone do that? Smoke burns. Smoke chokes. And yet, they kept doing it. And then they taught their children to do it too. Here's where it gets strange. Archaeologists have found tobacco residue in pipes from Alabama dating back roughly 3,000 years. That's not a modern habit. That's older than most religions you could name. The anthropologist Johannes Wilbard spent decades studying tobacco use among indigenous groups in South America, and what he found wasn't recreation. It was medicine, and more than medicine. Shamans used concentrated tobacco to induce trance states, to communicate with spirits, to heal the sick. The smoke was a bridge. It moved between the visible world and whatever lay beyond it. Why smoke, though? Why not just eat the leaf? Because burning changes everything. When you set a plant on fire, you release compounds that never existed in the living leaf. Nicotine, once vaporized and inhaled, reaches your brain in about 10 seconds. 10 seconds, that's faster than a needle injected straight into your vein. Your ancestors couldn't have known the biochemistry, but they absolutely knew the feeling, and the feeling was fast, undeniable, and unlike anything else available to them at the time. So the ritual wasn't a strange excuse for a chemical craving. The chemical effect is what made the ritual convincing. Now here's the twist almost nobody expects. Tobacco wasn't just a drug to early users. It was a form of respect. Sharing a pipe-sealed treaties between rival groups. Offering tobacco to the earth before planting a crop was a way of asking permission. Historian Jordan Goodman, who wrote extensively on tobacco's global history, described it as one of the most spiritually significant plants in the Americas long before Europeans ever saw a leaf of it. It wasn't about pleasure. It was about connection to other people, to the land, to something larger than the self. Then in 1492, everything changed. When Columbus's crew reached the Caribbean, they watched indigenous people smoking rolled leaves and had no framework for what they were seeing. Some sailors tried it. A few got violently sick. But within decades, tobacco crossed the Atlantic, and Europe did something it has done with almost every ritual substance it has ever encountered. It stripped away the meaning and kept the chemical. By the 1600s, tobacco wasn't sacred anymore. It was a commodity. Colonial economies in Virginia and the Caribbean were rebuilt almost entirely around growing it, and that shift came at a horrific human cost, fueling the transatlantic slave trade as plantations demanded more and more labor to keep up with European demand. A plant that once opened conversations with the divine was now measured in barrels and shipped for profit. Why did it spread so fast, though? Sugar spread fast, too. So did coffee. What made tobacco different? The answer sits inside your own nervous system. Nicotine is one of the most efficient, addictive substances that exists in nature. Within seconds of inhaling, it binds to receptors in your brain that are normally reserved for a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, and it triggers a flood of dopamine, the chemical your brain uses to mark something as worth repeating. Your ancestors didn't need religion to keep smoking once this loop was in motion. Their brains did the rest. This is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. The ritual gave tobacco its meaning, but the addiction is what gave tobacco its staying power. Two completely different forces, one plant, and together they built one of the most persistent human behaviors in recorded history. By the 1800s, cigarettes as you'd recognize them barely existed. Most people smoked pipes or cigars, slow rituals that took time and attention. Then, in 1881, a machine invented by James Bonsack changed the pace of everything. It could roll over 200 cigarettes a minute, a rate no human hand could match. Suddenly, tobacco wasn't a ceremony, it was a product line. And products need customers who don't ask too many questions. Enter Edward Bernays. A name you've probably never heard, but whose influence you've absolutely felt. Bernays was Sigmund Freud's nephew, and he applied his uncle's ideas about the unconscious mind directly to marketing. In 1929, working for the American Tobacco Company, he staged a now infamous event during New York's Easter Parade, hiring young women to publicly light what he called torches of freedom. It wasn't advertising in the traditional sense. It was psychological engineering. Smoking, almost overnight, became tangled up with independence, rebellion, and modern womanhood. Three things that had nothing to do with nicotine and everything to do with how humans crave identity. Notice the pattern here. First, ritual gave tobacco spiritual meaning. Then industry gave it addictive efficiency. Then marketing gave it social meaning all over again, just aimed at a completely different target. You are, whether you smoke or not, living downstream of all three of those forces. By the mid-20th century, smoking wasn't a ritual, a medicine, or even really a choice for most people who did it. It was simply what you did. Doctors appeared in cigarette advertisements. Movie stars lit up on screen as a shorthand for cool detachment. Smoking had become so normalized that questioning it felt almost strange, the way questioning running water or electricity would feel strange today. Then came the reckoning. In 1964, the U.S. Surgeon General released a report definitively linking smoking to lung cancer based on years of accumulating epidemiological evidence, including landmark work by researchers like Richard Dahl, whose studies in the 1950s had already shown a clear statistical relationship between smoking and lung cancer rates in British doctors. The data had existed for over a decade before the public reckoning caught up to it. Why the delay? Because unwinding a habit that had become woven into identity, industry, and government tax revenue was never going to be as simple as publishing a study. So why do you, today, still reach for a cigarette when you're stressed or bored or standing outside a bar making small talk? Because you inherited a nervous system built for exactly this kind of fast, reliable reward, wired by evolution to chase anything that fires dopamine quickly and predictably. You inherited a cultural memory of tobacco as something powerful, even sacred, even if you've never once thought about spirits or rituals. And you inherited over a century of engineered psychology telling you that smoke equals identity. None of that is a coincidence. None of that is weakness either. It's history, compressed into a habit, expressing itself through your body in real time. The next time you see someone light a cigarette or find yourself reaching for one, remember what you're actually watching. It's not just nicotine. It's not just stress relief. It's a 3,000-year-old ritual filtered through colonization, industrialization, and a century of marketing so effective, most people never even notice it working. You reach for it without thinking. Now you know exactly why.